Tim Ballou Sr. Please, I want to welcome you to our home territory, to Northwest Indian College. I really hope you take to heart what has been said today. Larry played an instrumental role in a number of occasions here at home. I remember in the 60s, you know, when fish are here, there's really no 24 hours in the fishing community. I can remember in the 60s, Larry hung his net all night long to harvest. In the 70s, Larry was instrumental on protesting our fisheries for the sockeye salmon. We burnt boats in the 70s. We were trying to let the federal government know who we are and where we come from. So, you know, we all had something to do with our Salish Sea. I think Salish Sea is a female giver of life. Ellie comes from a background of fisher people too. Ellie's family had 7 reef net sites throughout the Salish Sea. So, you know, it's real important that we continue to pass these things down. And I'm glad they're here to share what they know.
Larry says, why don't you go ahead and go first and I'll fill in. Emma asked about this event and Larry, of course, thought it was a great idea. I thought, oh, what a wonderful idea. I would love to listen to Larry speak. So I thought, okay, yeah, I'll go along with you. So I'm just here to support my husband.
Is it right if we sit here? Do we understand? Okay. And if you can't hear, please just let us know that we need to talk a little louder. As Ellie's mentioned, when Emma asked, I thought I was just going to go into a classroom. I thought, well, that would be fine. We'll just go visit with some of the students in their small classroom. And of course, as this started happening, we started seeing stuff coming out on the advertisements and everything. And I thought, wow, that's like what I thought we were going to be doing. So we're pretty informal here. And so I was just looking at what Emma printed here, so I thought I'd kind of go on that. Where I thought I would talk a little bit about, though, was as Emma talked earlier, she was talking about a journey. And so I kind of think in terms of my life, in terms of the journey and reflecting back. And so I thought I would go back to when we were real young. Where I grew up was in Marietta. I don't know if many folks are familiar with that, but a small community is right on the border. Actually, the road runs through where half of the folks on this side of the road lived on the res, and some of us who lived on this side of the road were off the res. But the thing that was real common there is that we were all people of the water, and so we all grew up on the river. And that's what I'm talking about. I was born in the 40s, and so this is the 40s and 50s and 60s. And so I wanted to give you a little idea of what it was like during that time, and maybe take you through a little bit of time from my perspective in terms of Marietta. We lots of river skiffs in where we grew up. My father, like Ellie's father and her grandfather, they owned purse seiners and built their own. In fact, her great-grandfather, great-grandfather actually built his own purse seiner. Lots of purse seine boats here within our community, quite a few large gill netters, but really a lot of skiffs. And so us that grew up in what we call the Bellingham side, fish straight nets over there, lots of stake nets over on this side, but there's really lots and lots of fishing people. And I say fishing, you call them fishers now, we call them fisherwomen, fishermen at that time. But I can still remember as a young person going to Marietta grade school, where when my dad was gone to Alaska fishing, or out in the ocean fishing, the ones that stayed home, of course, was our mothers, but our mothers all fished. So on the Bellingham side, if you went down to the drift, it was all women down there. And of course, us kids getting in the way. And in summer times, we were really in the way. And then on my mom's parents, they owned fish houses along with the Washingtons. And there used to be a village that on both sides of our river, for those folks that aren't familiar, when you go over, we call it the Big Ridge. There was a village, there was houses all up and down there, and there was skiffs all through there. And so all the families were fishing there, and everybody spent growing up on the river, us as children, playing on the river and fishing on the river. As I was mentioning, my grandmother on my mother's side, in that fish house, when my mother was using our skiff, they let out skiffs for what they called the third. And so they had those small little river skiffs, 10 to 15 foot river skiffs, maybe more like 12 to 18 foot river skiffs, and they had just like 3 horses on it. So during the summer times, us kids all fished on the river. And then we gave a third back to my grandparents and for us using their skiffs. And so, but the whole community was all around the river. And then of course, as we got older, we got to go onto the larger boats and go out into the Salish Sea, and then also a lot of us got to go to Alaska. We spent lots of time up in South. In fact, as I was going through school, I spent more time in Alaska than I did here. I still remember for the tribal members that are here, going by Stommish every year when these canoe races were going on. We were heading to Alaska, so we never even got to see Stommish. So folks that are from here remember that. And so as time went on, though, we moved from the river onto the larger boats and started fishing the Salish Sea in most cases, but also we spent lots of time up and down Alaska. I've had the opportunity to fish from Cooke here to Costa Rica, so I've got to fish the whole west coast. So I got to meet the people, the wonderful people on the coast and down in Central America and get all that experience there. And as part of that journey, though, getting involved with the community and back and looking at as we evolved, and I got involved with our community when I got home out of the service and being on staff first and then getting the opportunity to serve on our tribal council. The thing that kept coming up in our conversations all the time at the council was about our treaty and what it meant to our people. And as a young person, I kept trying to understand because the elders and the older councilmen kept talking about, well, we have a treaty right here. And so us younger ones would be asking, well, if it's a treaty right, well, why isn't it that way? And so all that conversation went on in terms of all the history of that as to why it was that way. And then of course the constant reminder within all the meetings of, even as a young person and then when we got involved as to the importance of fishing to our community and what that meant. And then as I thought about that as a young person, I would think about it this way, and as we all know, and you're all going to be, especially you younger ones, you're going to say, at this point in my life, this is what I know, this is what I understand, this is what I believe. And then as we get more information, we start to change. We start to learn more, and we say, well, why is that? And I think that's a great thing. But then what do we know and what do we change about? So my conversation now, in terms of how I think and what I think is important, now that I'm like 71 years old, versus when I got involved with our community when I was like 24, is far different. Let alone the times, like you hear my description of my view and my involvement with our community at that time, at that age, is far different than what it is now, let alone what's changed since then. And so that's kind of the journey I want to kind of run by you as we have this conversation today, was that whether it be on the Atlantic salmon, whether it be on the conversations around the salmon itself, my view of how few fish there are that we're fighting over right now. I was reminded there about a month ago. I was reading one of the books and they were talking about the careers of the biologists in fisheries, of how incremental their careers were, such that when they would come in and they would look at the base of what's going on in the fishery and what's the baseline for the amount of fish they're dealing with, and that became the baseline of their career. And so then when they lost, it only went down to their career until the next biologist came in with their career, and they started that as their baseline. And so you start to look at how it's tearing down. And then you're looking at the different, both federal and state public policy in terms of how we go about managing the fisheries and deal with fisheries. And as I came home again about 4 years ago to get involved with, actually I came home to retire, and so about the fourth time. But anyway, I started looking at what's going on with the diminishment of our fisheries, and what can we do about it. And so the more I try to learn and understand, because we have real good people that work on this here at Lemmy, as well as I think that even in the Northwest, there's lots of good people really working on this issue, that why is it continually declining? What's going on? And so that earlier stuff I was sharing with you, I could see some of that, but I kept saying, well, what's happening? And so I started reading some books. My late brother, he gave me a book called King of Fish, The 1,000-Year Legacy of Salmon. I don't know how many folks have read that one, but great book. And in that book, started talking about the history of salmon that was clear back to, I think it was in England and Scotland in the 1500s, having this very same conversation that we're having now. And they couldn't save the Atlantic salmon in the United Kingdom. Then it takes them to the East Coast, clear up into Newfoundland and up into Greenland, and they're having the same conversation. Additional information, but it was about political will. Then he went into the Sacramento River Basin, same conversation. What happened there? Columbia River Basin, Fraser, we're coming up the coast, we're coming through times. And so you look at this stuff, and it's about political will. We have much, much, much more information as to what we can go about doing things. But we have to swing away from thinking that whether it be progress or that as man or women, that we can control all this stuff. Even that philosophy of when I was looking at why is the hatchery system, which was supposed to be the replacement for progress, why didn't it work? And I see none of you shaking your heads yes, and so you must be maybe marine biologists or something, but you know, we found out that we can't deal with it that way. We're going to have to solve this problem. So I even coined the thing, I mean, a lot of you folks have heard about the miner's canary. I think the miner's canary, we need to apply that to the salmon, and salmon need to be the miner's canary, because it's really about the health end of the ecosystem. And of course we all recognize that it's all tied together. It can't be just one solution. But it's going to take us really coming together to figure out how do we deal with this. You know, the hatcheries just can't replace the natural system. But that means we just can't fix one thing of it. It's a very complex thing, and I give a lot of credit to a lot of the folks that are working out in the communities as well as our communities to think about how do we get everybody down to the table, and we're all going to have to accept our contribution to the problem. And maybe first recognize we have a problem, and then come together and say, are we willing to do our part and feel our share of the pain to fix it? And I think that's how we have to start the conversation that way, and then recognize that there was a reason our folks are from here, because this is just a wonderful place to live. And the folks that came here after us, that's just a wonderful place to live. But if we don't fix this stuff, folks, it will not be a wonderful place to live. I think we'll be migrating towards Alaska or somewhere, because we're not doing a real good job here right now. And I don't say this to point fingers, face blame or anything, but I think that unless we come together to solve this, and the folks that know me know I'm a pretty good optimist, that I think that we will figure it out, that we have to solve that kind of a problem. That's what I want to kind of talk about in general terms of how we go about doing this. As I was reading also one of them books there, I think it was Fish Without Rivers, one of the folks was talking about there. They were talking about the debate back in the early 1900s by some of the technical policy folks that were having a conversation as to do we need to deal with the salmon from the standpoint of the Columbia River model or the Fraser model. And the Canadians chose to use the Fraser model and use the wild river system. And we chose down here to use the hatchery system. And then you look, this was the early 1900s, I think it was around, like 1909 or 1915. And now you see the difference in terms of the healthiness of the river. But there's still major pressures because of competing users, even on the Fraser. But the difference of how do you unravel after the billions that have been spent on the Columbia River to deal with the return of the salmon of the Chinook that was a major fishery within the early years of the Columbia River. But how do you deal with the politics now? And we've got Bonneville Power Administration, you've got major commerce on the river, you've got major ag there, you've got all the dams that are around the Bonneville Power. How do you deal with that to unwind that? Because you've got major political forces that you have to deal with and have to try to solve that problem. After billions have been spent, how much difference have we made? And then where's the Fraser going? And so you start to look at all these pieces together, and now we add climate change to this, and we say, now how are we going to go ahead and deal with some of these issues? But in my opinion, these have to rise to the levels of policy discussions, and people have to have the political will to solve this, because looking at that history, which I don't think is really out there because everybody's trying to protect their interests, that we have to go ahead and it's going to come to you younger folks that understand this, to have the right conversations, because I think the solutions are all out there. It's really about us just having the political will to deal with it. I thought with that, if you can see I can dominate the conversation, we would maybe swing over to some of the other things that Emma wanted us to visit with a little bit about. Maybe we talked a little bit about our thoughts around the swallow, the reef net, and why we got involved with that. So I let Ellie start, and then again I'll try to fill in the blanks. How was that?
I guess the swallow, we spent years fighting Gateway at Cherry Point, and it just became evident that even though we won the battle, and we didn't I didn't celebrate it for at least a year. It took me a year to say, okay, maybe we did win it. We won it for right now. It's no good. But it still wasn't safe. You still knew they could come back. They could still. But if we actually had a working reef net anchored at Cherry Point in the footprint of that dock, tell me how they were going to build that dock. So Larry had this great idea. He wanted to build a reef net. And I was like, okay, we can do that. We know exactly where it's going to go. So we spent 8 weeks. Poor boys worked 7 days a week. And once they got done building it, they're like, okay, we're going to go for fishing for real now. You guys can go, do your reef net stuff. So we got an actual reef net up and running, and we got it anchored up there at Cherry Point. Unfortunately, this is the second year of us not being able to fish sockeye salmon. So building a reef net in a year, first year, where there was no fish, it was kind of hard. You sat looking at those screens for 8 hours, and you wouldn't see a single fish going over them. Or the boys were looking in the water and couldn't see a single fish going into the... So there were some practice sets, but we never really got to see what it was going to be like working. Then of course that was followed by, we moved it this year to Lummi Island. And we got hit again with another year of not fishing sockeye. So she didn't get to work how she was supposed to, but we still have hope. Next year, it's going to be a better year. We're going to be able to catch some sockeye with that reef net. And with the reef net, it's brought us full circle. We're back to the way we originally caught fish. And it doesn't even really bother me that we didn't catch fish, because it's just the process of doing it. That's it.
The other interest we had in why we wanted to do it was Troy Olson and the late Justin Finkbonner and Richard Salmon and Steve Salmon and Matt Ballou and a number of the other folks from within our community were, along with our chief and some of our traditional folks, recognize the real importance of the historical significance of the reef net to our community. And our experience from being on the water is we know there's a great deal of wellness and healing that goes with that. And we thought that this would also be another opportunity because we got the benefit a couple of years ago of being asked by the Lummi Tribal Schools to take some children out on the Salish Sea and take them to Jonah Point, one of our homelands out in the islands. And we had the kids aboard with us, and as the kids were riding with us, we come to realize how few of them had been on the water. You know, we take it for granted. We both come from fishing families, and we get the benefit of being on the water all the time, so we just take it for granted. And them young kids, even though we know which families they're from, they didn't know that they come from fishing families. And so we thought, well, there's a real opportunity here on the reef net, both from the tribal schools as well as from even the college. There's a number of folks that don't get the benefit of being on the water. And as we got involved with the reef net, we thought, well, there's an opportunity here too for some other folks to get the benefit of being back on the water. So we see that as a real opportunity for wellness. It's a place-based fishery that's on anchors. We think there's an opportunity as we go and talk with them and their science department that there can be some science applied to it, clearly some wellness, and just the experience of the summer, of being able to be on the water in the summertime on these platforms. We think there's some real opportunity there, both, and we've been really supported by the local Reef Net Association. They've been extremely helpful in us gearing up and bringing some of the technology, and they've been very helpful. I don't know if any of you folks are related to some of the folks from over there, but I walked in the meeting, and I'm 71. I think I was the younger guy in the group of the Reef Net Association. So they're kind of challenged too with how do they pass on all their knowledge to who's going to be next coming in, because they've all got this passion for the reef net. But it's an incredible opportunity, and just it's almost like a summer vacation over there with them guys, and how their families all come together over there, and the things they go about working together as a community and as a group over there. It's a wonderful thing, and as we looked at our tribe has got a piece of land over there, we call them Altoona, that started back during the aquaculture time, as the chairman was talking about, and when we were doing some diving and we were doing some algae over there back in the 70s. And we see it as a prime piece of land where the sense of community, the sense of coming togetherness, the campsites and the stuff going on over there could be a beautiful, wonderful, beautiful. That's just our thought, you know, we're just the fishermen side of this, but we just think there's a wonderful opportunity to be able for folks to come together and really enjoy the summer, and especially a lot of the younger folks that don't get the benefit of being from one of the current fishermen families, and an opportunity for them to get back in and connect back to who they are and where they come from. But that's just our thoughts, and so we're going to continue to try to share that with our community, and as well as the wonderful relationship we've developed with the folks from the Reef Net Association over there.
I think it's so important because I never even thought we had a generation of kids that weren't raised on the water or didn't even go out on the water. I mean, our children have been on our boat since they were in diapers, so I mean, our kids were there all the time, our grandkids were there, and I just assumed everybody else had all their kids out there. So if you have a whole generation of kids who don't know they belong out there, they're missing something in their life and they don't even know what's missing. It's not until you get back out there that you become whole. And just being out there makes you whole again. So that's the hope, to be able to get the kids. The Reef Net's a safer platform to be taking them out and showing them where they need to be, where we started from.
when we were over visiting with the Reef Net Association has an annual meeting every year, and so we were over at one of the folks' houses, and they invited us over, and one of the Reef Net owners brought us a picture, and the picture was showing the picture of Legal Bay on the other side of Lummi Island, and it was showing where it was either 2 or 3 fish traps that they had in there. And then on the back, it had the state statute in 1898 that legislated that there could not be any reef nets in front or inside or in back from so many feet from the traps. And that's how that, in 1898, they were able to remove our reef nets from over there. I didn't even know it was clear back to 1898. I thought it was in early 1900s that happened. But he was nice enough to share that, and I thought, wow, that goes clear back that far in terms of how they were legislating for big business to come in. Because of course we knew that once they got to Can, you know, they were able to go ahead and expand and actually get into commercial fishing at that time over there. So with that, I thought we'd swing over to how we got involved with the Atlantic salmon issue. So maybe you can start.
Well, our boys are fishing our season, and they're fishing over at Salish, over at Point Williams. And I've turned them into little reporters. You know, they report everything odd, or I've taught them to take pictures with stamps on them, geo stamps, so you know when there's something odd in the water, and they can take the picture of it, you've got food. So they send me 2 pictures that morning, and they're like, it was 7:30 in the morning on Monday morning. And they're like, my boys, well, they're 24 and 20. They were like, what are these that we're catching? And it was like, I looked at the pictures and I was like, those are Atlantic salmon. What are they doing at Point Williams? So that started a phone call to our harvest manager. And he had no idea, he hadn't heard anything about it. So he said, I'll call WWF and see what's going on. And then we find out, like, steamer caught them the day before. And so people were catching them in Sunday and Monday. And that wasn't until that day, I don't think, then they said, oh, there was a spill. But there was only, what, 4,000 or 5,000 spill. And it was Monday. And I was like, and when did this spill happen? And they're like, well, it happened over the weekend, you know? And it's like, how did this go on for several days and we weren't told? We could have done so much more if we had been told. They could have all been caught while they were still there around the pens. So the lack of them not sharing that information with us was pretty upsetting. But then as the spill increased to where, well, there could be 300 to 400,000 of them now. And it was devastating, you know. It was just like, what is this going to do? We have so few fish, and we have ESA listed fish. It was heartbreaking. It was nice to know the boys were out there catching some, and then I think it was the next day they had that set for 50 of them in one set, right? But that was the beginning of the Atlantics for us.
So our concern then is we're around the water enough to know that up in Canada how they can bury stories, and so they've been able to manage and mitigate and bury all the stories of the incidents they've had in the sea pens up there, and because of my experience on our council and stuff, I know how the politics works and how the PR works and how the media works, and so I thought, wow, they're going to bury this. So I thought, well, one of the ways they can't bury it is if the reporters get involved, especially if an investigative reporter gets involved. And so we were fortunate enough knowing Daryl, Linda Mapes, and so he made a call. So then Linda calls us, and so we fill her in. And there was enough then when she started digging, all of a sudden the story started to change because they couldn't bury it anymore. And as you folks heard, heard about the 4,000 or 5,000, which then eventually turned into bigger than that and bigger than that. And then they come to find out the history of it was it such that this spill was not the first spill. There was a spill back in the 90s. There was a major wild fish viral disease that happened the 2000s, and yet there was no media, or there was no press on any of this stuff. And there's still not any press on this. The major kill that they had to do in Chile, and now their suspect is whether or not that one that happened in Manchester in the 2000s, is that the same one that happened down in Chile? And if you look at it, if you go back far enough and dig a little bit more, you find out that the Norwegians were very concerned about this, and they're real rigid on their regulations over in Norway to protect themselves from this. I don't think any of that stuff's going on in Canada, and I think that stuff was going on in Chile. And at Manchester, as we dug into it a little bit, we found out that the state, because of this is my perception, is the state, because of the lack of their permitting requirements, were not allowed to go in and monitor the fish kill that happened in Manchester in the 2000s. That's how weak our lack of permitting process. The chairman and the team that worked on it up here, as they started dealing with the state agencies, they said that the state agencies, nobody was taking responsibility, and there was no oversight even of the state agencies. So everybody just started to point fingers at each other, who was supposed to be doing what. You've seen the response in the media that they set up a command post about 2 weeks later, and then they told people to go ahead and use your state fishing license, and you could go out and go ahead and catch as many Atlantic salmon as you want.
With a fishing pole.
With a fishing pole.
That
was their incident response.
No way.
Unfortunately, our folks ratcheted it up pretty fast, and they went in there. But like Ellie said, had we been able to, we probably could, because you have to think of them in the context of them being pen animals. They stayed there for quite a while before they took off. If we could have responded right away, we probably could have cordoned them off and caught a real high. We don't know what's out there. As you heard me talking about, we're coming off of real tough times right now with not having fish this year. Our fry from our hatcheries and our wild stocks are coming down the river. These are full-size fish. We don't know what the predatory side of them are. We don't know what kind of disease they're carrying. And so it was like, holy cow. Our problems could be magnified in terms of them. If they are predators, then they could be eating our salmon fry on the outbound migration. The disease issues that we'd have to deal with, we're not going to see that from 4 to 8 years from now, the impacts. And then how do you prove that? You know, we're dealing with a pretty large company that knows how to play the game. I mean, they're well staffed up on the legal side and the PR side. And, you know, I think they're like a $6 billion company. They're a Canadian company. You know, they just recently bought, I think they own now all the sea pens within Washington. But on 8 sea pens, I think they're making like $30 million, so they're going to fight to protect that. So we've got major issues here, let alone that it really should the Atlantics belong up here. I do know that, you know, on mariculture and aquaculture, that has moved a long ways now. The technology is clearly there as to why them could be moved up onto land. If we did have to have aquaculture and mariculture here, it can all be done with quality water in, quality water out, and we don't have to have the sea pens out there. That's strictly a cost factor. You'll hear the argument that it can't be done, it can be done. It's going on all over the world. But again, if you come back to what do we want here in the Northwest, do we want that here? You know, clearly, what benefit is our folks getting up here, and what kind of harm is potentially could do that, especially when we're looking to try to protect our wild stocks. Our tribe, for example, since 1976 or 1978, we've been trying to protect the early spring Chinook here. And we're not, even though we've not had a directed fishery on that fishery since then, we do not see a significant amount of return because of the habitat issues, and now compounded by climate change. And so we've got real dire straits as to how do we go about fixing that issue, even though we haven't had a directed fishery. Part of our challenge is the early spring Chinook, even though they migrate up in May, they stay in the river and hatch with their fall Chinook. So that means they're subject to the lower stream flows, they're subject to the temperature issues, they're subject to the poaching, all the issues of how do they keep it shade and up there. And so that's part of the problem. The other part of our problem is even though we're We've listed it under ESA. We're still trying to protect it. The offshore troll fishery is still harvested at a 30% rate. So that's international agreements that have to be fixed. We've got major, it's just so complicated, whether it be on north of Falcon or whether we're dealing with the PSC issues. We're a very small player in a big pond. And lots of politics, lots of interest in the countries, all the resources around it, all the protections of the habitat, and now climate change on top of that. I'm sure some of you folks have followed the last few years where the blob, it was out the north end of Vancouver Island. That's a major impact that happened to us in terms of the water temperature issues. And last year they seen a peak of it where it impacted from the Aleutian chain all the way down to us into California. And then we're still seeing the residuals of all that impacts down here. And again, all that's added to the complexities of the competing users within the various ecosystems. Our tribe, as you folks have probably read, have made some progress, and they're actually dealing with some of the farmers, because the farmers have said, let's figure if we can do our part to start to change this. They haven't got all the associations, but they've got some of the larger ones, and they're starting to work through it. But it's going to take that kind of thinking for us all to share in that kind of thinking to say, well, at the same time, we don't put everybody out of business, but we all got to share in the pain and see how we come to long-range solutions to solve this problem, especially for the reason for our children to be able to grow up and thrive in this beautiful place that we all call home.
We had one other small piece of work to do before we close this and thank everybody. But first of all, let's thank our speakers again.